Welcome, everybody, to a very special edition of Dispatch Radio Hour featuring best-selling author and Outside Magazine contributing editor Florence Williams. We're asking all the right questions in this one.
Wait, seriously, you could hear the sound of cat?
Yeah. Were you studying boobs at the time?
Yeah, I was.
You're going to call your mom and brag that Florence Williams gave you kudos in it? Right now, I'm going to do that, actually. Zoe, are you fully addicted? You got the runner's high.
Full on addicted.
Does he call you Flo?
In writing this book.
Recorded from Studio Boulder, smack dab in the middle of the bubble itself with folks from Boulder's Center for Environmental Journalism. We'll take you to some serene places.
I just sat on the north rim of the Grand Canyon.
Hiked the Appalachian Trail, circumnavigated Long Island Sound in a sea kayak, went to the Himalaya a couple of times.
And it was so quiet. It was like 6 in the morning. There's, mist rising from the lake.
And some not so fun places.
The blaze rolled faster than the inmate could run, growing larger and faster as it devoured more of the thick, high grass.
Like the total den of iniquity. I mean, it's like such an evil place.
And get this, Florence has so many talents.
She's going to make a little music video about science on the top of each of the summits.
Real quick before we jump in, we have a gift for you, our friends of the show. If you are in the Boulder or Denver area, we would love to see you out this Thursday, May 17th, at Studio Boulder for the debut of Rare Air Talks. Every ticket holder gets a free beer at Upslope at the after party. And get this, we can get you a $10 ticket. Come out for a powerful night of storytelling from 6 to 8 p.m. on Thursday at Studio Boulder, and then head over to Upslope for the after party featuring the Good Kind Band in benefit of Big City Mountaineers. We will be celebrating diversity in the outdoors community all night long with feature speakers Luis Benitez from the governor's office and Jamie Logan, a pioneering rock climber who in her later years transitioned to life as a woman. She will share her story on stage for the first time on May 17th with journalist Chris Widener. Other featured guests for the evening include Len Nessifer with Native Outdoors, Elise Rhinelander with Out There Adventures, and journalist Sonia Pevsner. You can read all about it at rareairtalks.com. And now for that discount code, enter FOTS, all lowercase, friends of the show, at checkout and get a $10 ticket. We hope to see you out on Thursday. Now on to the show.
Backcountry Colorado, hiking, backpacking.
I did a lot of marathons. I was convinced to do some ultras.
Climbing, and I do filming and photography.
I just like the ultras because I love the community. I just think that everybody is so nice, whether they're the first place finishers or, us that kind of mosey along.
I'm here at the Airtstream at the Studio Boulder with my co-host,
Kelly McConnell.
We have a bunch of badass journalists. So starting with Zoe.
I'm Zoe Rome, and I'm a soon-to-be master's student from the University of Colorado Boulder and freelance journalist. I like to write about people that do cool stuff outside, usually for pretty long periods of time.
She kind of skipped some of the meat of it. She also recently ran back and forth across the Grand Canyon.
So you're a big runner.
Yeah.
Is that your favorite outdoor sport?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I like to run a lot.
Me too.
And next to Zoe, we've got...
I'm Florence Williams.
Florence, not Flo, guys. Florence Williams. Now,
Florence.
just note to the podcast, to Dispatch Station out there, when you start hearing me call her Flo, you know that...
Right, you're friends.
I'm in, yeah.
You gotta earn it, though.
You're already a friend of the show, so thanks for stopping by. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am a freelance journalist. I'm the author of, most recently, a book called The Nature Fix, Why Nature Makes Us Happier, Healthier, and More Creative.
Did you guys notice she looked at the book cover just to make sure she had that
It's a long subtitle. I have to get it right. I also, I'm a contributing editor at Outside Magazine, and I do podcasts for Outside and also for Audible. My first book, I actually started while I was a fellow at CU, and the title of that is Breasts, A Natural and Unnatural History.
Intern Jake just perked up a little bit in the back there.
No pun intended. So it's actually an environmental history of a body part, and I talk about how modern life has changed breasts.
And speaking of radio, wonderful radio voice, Michael Kodas, tell us a little bit about you.
I am the Deputy Director of the Center for Environmental Journalism. At the moment, the acting director while the actual director is on sabbatical.
You are acting like the director of the center. I like it.
That's it. That's I'm striking a pose. I just have to hold it for a whole semester. And I'm an author and photojournalist. I have a couple of investigative nonfiction books out, and do quite a bit of magazine work, and occasionally appear on podcasts, but have not created.
How many wildfires have you witnessed firsthand?
I have no idea. Probably close to 100, I'd guess. No. Many of them really small that nobody would have heard about, and then a few of the big project fires that everybody heard about.
Now, before people go Googling and trying to figure out what kind of fetish this is, it was for book research.
Yeah, and I started this book project also when I was a Scripps Fellow in environmental journalism at CU in the program that I now help direct.
Is there a lot of people who already are into science who come into the program?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how much science Florence had, but
How much did you have, Florence?
Yeah, not much actually. I had been an environmental journalist, so I had been writing a lot about policy. And frankly, I was getting a little bored of it because a lot of it was sort of the same story. It's the Forest Service is doing this and the Clean Air Act means this. I got to a point where I really became just personally very interested in what was happening in our bodies because of pollution. What did this mean for our children? I became a mother. I became sort of much more interested in the people side of the environmental story. And so CU for me was this great opportunity, to get paid for doing research. So I was paid as research faculty, but I could audit these classes in endocrinology.
And so were you studying boobs at the time?
Yeah, I was. Okay. So specifically, I was studying really what the effects were of pollution on our human endocrine system. What did this mean for breast cancer? There's a lot of that in my family. I was interested in that. At some point, I found out that we all have toxic chemicals coursing through our blood. And for me, that meant I had toxic chemicals in my breast milk and I was nursing a child, And so I wanted to know, how do our cells work? How do our endocrine systems work? What does cancer cell biology have to say about this? It was this very kind of human caused interest, that was just very specific to our health.
Yeah, and I had a similar experience. I was just a work-a-day journalist, started out as a photojournalist,
A work-a-day journalist?
Yeah, newspaper guy, and so I'm a news junkie, and, I got to work in the White House, I got to go to the World Series, I got to do all kinds of cool assignments that, back in the heydays of newspapers we got to do. I gradually focused more and more on environmental issues, and then ended up carving out a niche for myself that I don't think exists anywhere anymore, where once a year I would get to do a big project that the newspaper would refer to as adventure journalism, and I saw it as a way of sugarcoating environmental stories that people probably wouldn't read if there wasn't an adrenaline storytelling aspect to it. So hiked the Appalachian Trail, circumnavigated Long Island Sound in a sea kayak, went to the Himalaya a couple of times, and to South America on these stories. And as I did more of them, covering fisheries, covering fire and forestry, I dealt a lot more with scientists and science, which I had been terrified of when I went through my undergrad. I just thought, these are the smart people I don't want to hang out with. But suddenly I was out with these folks on fishing boats or in, deep in rainforests and seeing their work and realized, actually, this is really exciting. And there are great stories around science, and I want more science behind my stories. And so that led me to want to come back to the university and actually, get at least, a basic understanding of science and be able to speak a little bit of their language. Because that's often what we end up doing, is taking a story for the general public that feel about science the way I did, that are frightened of it and intimidated by it, and translate that into lay language, into language that everybody can understand, and make it exciting to them, suddenly make them feel like they're off with this scientist out on a glacier or in the middle of a rainforest, doing something that is, to me, every bit as exciting as what a mountaineer or, an ultra runner or, somebody on a paddling adventure would be doing.
It's tricky, especially, when you start getting into neuroscience, which I write a bit about in the Nature Fix. It's so complicated. There are a lot of nuances. Even some of the imaging studies, are controversial. How good is the technology? All that stuff. And, the challenge for me, I think, was first to understand it and then to figure out how to write about it in an engaging way. And I guess it's so hard that the way I would say I do it is really slowly. I spent some time in the Utah desert with a cognitive neuroscience, a scientist who's really interested in our attentional networks. So how our brains process information how we toggle between our attentional network and, our default network, which is sort of our brain that's not actively working on a task, but that's kind of spacing out. And that's something that really gets engaged when you're outside in nature. Your attentional network kind of shifts into a default mode. And that's part of why it's relaxing for us. It's because we're not trying to solve a task. We're not answering our emails. We're not looking for a parking space. We're kind of spacing out in nature. And so just understanding even what the heck the attentional network was, that took me a while.
One experience for me, without getting into all the intricacies of the science, was my last book, which dealt with some of the troubles on Mount Everest and in the Himalaya. And while I was reporting on that and spending 3 and 4 months at a time in the Everest region, and particularly right on the flanks of Mount Everest, I ended up spending a bunch of time with scientists who were effectively mountaineers. They were going up, they were doing amazing research on these glaciers. They were working as hard as any of the climbers were. And there was also this aspect of recognizing that science is exciting, that there are people out here doing amazing stuff with science. And the same thing was true when I started work on the wildfire book. I mean, you're going out with folks that are walking all day and sometimes days on end in forests, and sometimes lighting stuff on fire to see how it burns, which definitely spoke to my inner pyro Beavis. Or going to places like...
My inner pyro Beavis. Love it.
You guys remember Beavis?
Oh, yeah.
Fire! And, there's...
Jake, do you know Beavis? Jake knows Beavis and Butthead. He
still hangs out with them. They don't want to be seen with me anymore. I'm gray-haired. But there's places like, the Missoula Fire Science Lab, where they have this giant, effectively test tube that they start fire whirls in, giant fire tornadoes in, and you can hang out with these guys as they study what goes in to causing a fire whirl that goes 50 or 100 feet into the air, and not just learn about that and understand the science of it, but witness that. And it's really much more exciting than I imagined it was when I was in my teens and just trying to avoid biology class at all costs. Zoe had a really cool story related to that recently.
Yeah, I'm working on a couple right now, one for Rock and Ice and one for Outside, about Ulyana Nadia Horodovsky. Probably butchered that last name.
Well, that was like the name pronunciation Olympics.
Yeah. And she's working on this really cool project right now, but I'm really fascinated with her because I often find when you find someone that's passionate, they're never just passionate or good at one thing. They're amazing at 20 things, and then they're like, how do I fit this all in one Kelly. Human? Yeah. And so she's this amazing badass alpinist and really dedicated climate scientist who's just super passionate about engaging people in science through mountaineering. So she takes people up on mountains, teaches them how to do kind of more advanced alpinism, and then teaches them how to do citizen science, and then takes their data and actually uses publishes on it. It's not just for fun, a science project. She literally is producing novel science from this data that she's using from just kind of casual alpinists, which is just totally amazing. Yeah, she's so cool, and she's doing this thing now. It's called Summits, Songs, and Science, and she's going to climb the 100 highest peaks in Colorado, the 50 highest high points in the US, the 7 summits, and she's going to make a little music video about science on the top of each of the summits. It's so rad.
What do you think about it? That sounds incredible. I want to hear all those songs. That takes a lot of just... Wow, is she making all original songs for that too?
So her boyfriend / climbing partner is a professional musician.
Of course.
So yeah. So it's kind of a dream team scenario. Once again, you're never just good at one thing. You also have the professional musician alpinist boyfriend. So
Russ, you've got to get her on your show.
Yeah, we did Boulder.
Yeah,
local.
She's got a pretty busy schedule. But...
She's like a lot of people in Boulder. She lives in Boulder, but she's only here 6 weeks out of the year.
She's got a lot of climbing to do. Yeah. Well, Kelly, we want to do a little show and tell. Is this a good time?
Yeah. For what? What are you showing?
I think we want to do some readings. Why don't we just relax and listen to a little bit of Zoe's piece first, and then our two authors can prepare. And while Zoe's queuing that up, Nick, will you talk a little bit about what you're always up to stuff, interesting stuff. I know you've got the REI series that just launched. So tell me a little bit about that and what's up your sleeve for down the line here.
Sure. So REI,
get up here.
So REI's podcast, Take It From Me, just launched, and I was the host and producer of that. So in that show, every single episode, a beginner learns from a total expert. So in the first episode, I talked to an ultra runner. Brendan Leonard, actually, if you're familiar with the show, you know him. In the second episode, Brendan interviews somebody else, and then that person interviews somebody else, and so on for 8 episodes. So check it out. You can find it on iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts, or on rei.com/blog. And I'm also assistant producer at Threshold. It's a podcast and public radio show where every season we take a big deep dive into an environmental story, and we try to tell human stories of the natural world. And this upcoming season is all about the Arctic, not just ice sheets and polar bears, but people in the Arctic. And so I spent some time up in Canada, and most recently up in northeastern Alaska in the territory called Nunavut, doing reporting. And this won't premiere until early September, but we're super, super excited. It's going to be a really, really amazing season, so definitely keep an ear out for it.
Florence, how is Nick doing on his elevator speech?
I was really impressed. I was
Good.
really impressed. Totally nailed it.
Yeah.
You've got that just little summary of what the podcast does, and I thought you did a great job.
gonna call his
And
mom
I think you have a
tonight.
pretty killer radio voice.
Yes.
He has the best radio voice.
Isn't he? It's really good.
Are you going to call your mom and brag that Florence Williams gave you kudos tonight?
Right now, I'm going to do that, actually.
Yeah. You should text her.
Make
Text her
sure
right now.
Make sure to credit the training. It's all in the training.
You got to thank the team. You got to acknowledge the team. It's important to acknowledge the team. Zoe, are we ready to play a little sample? Can you cue this up? Tell us what we're going to hear.
Yeah, so I was reporting on the Yukon Quest 1,000-mile sled dog race in Alaska and Canada, which is not the Iditarod, but it's known for being a really rough and rugged sled dog race. Going into this, I knew nothing about mushing or sled dogs, and so that was quite the adventure. But I think one of my favorite parts about reporting on this were the amazing characters that I met. And one of them stood out to me right away because I recognized his accent right off the bat. I'm from rural northern Arkansas. He's from northern rural Arkansas. His accent was just a bit more pronounced than mine, but it kind of led me on this crazy goose chase around Alaska and Canada to follow this guy who ended up winning the race.
It's 40 below and snowing. Huddled next to a wood-burning stove inside an old schoolhouse in Eagle, Alaska, a small village in the bush with a population of about 200 or 300, depending on the season. It's a strange place to find myself, a reporter from Arkansas chasing sled dogs as they race across Alaska and Canada, which is why I'm even more surprised to run into a fellow Arkansan and his 14 Alaskan Huskies.
Well, you're not from here, are you? I guess I haven't lost my accent, people tell me.
Alan Moore, sometimes known as the Southern Gentleman of Mushing, is an elite sled dog runner whose path from small-town Arkansas to mushing fame surprises even him.
It does not make sense. Redneck from Arkansas comes from there to here, running dogs.
Moore grew up in Arkansas's northeast corner, in a small town called Manila. He has always been active and loved being outside. Most of all, he loved animals. Moore studied wildlife management at Arkansas State University, and eventually went on to work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, tagging ducks and counting deer. One thing he didn't like was Arkansas summer heat.
When I left Arkansas, it was 100 plus degrees with the heat index and all that. I wanted to go where it was cool.
So, he sold almost everything he owned and loaded the rest into his pickup truck, along with his 2 young daughters, Bridget and Jennifer, and drove to the coldest place he knew, Alaska. I'm going to skip to the end a bit. He and his wife now have a kennel of almost 40 dogs.
We just love to be around dogs, and that's what it was all about. And now it's become so much more than just dogs.
For Moore's part, he's just glad to be enjoying the cooler winter weather.
Up here, if it's 40 below, 50 below, I can put more clothes on, because you can only take so much off.
For AK, I'm Zoe Rome.
So tell me one thing that didn't make it into your piece that you found super interesting about the dog race.
I developed the reputation as being the reporter that made everyone cry. I wasn't mean to them, I just caught them at vulnerable moments. And so in talking with Alan Moore, who's known as being this very stoic guy, I was asking him why dogs mean so much to him, and he was telling me a story about a time that he was working with an autistic girl down in Texas, and she had never spoken at school before. And when she was playing with the dog, she started to speak with the dog and was rubbing its head and was just really connecting with it, and he just broke down in tears, and people didn't believe me when I told them. I was like, here's the tape.
Nice work. You asked good questions.
Was that was there a score? Did you get higher points for making him cry? Were you?
People just didn't believe it. They're like, Alan Moore doesn't cry. Because these people, I mean, they're out alone by themselves. And
yeah,
it's 50 below. They're, they're barely eating. They're not sleeping. They just, they love to suffer. They are, I think to do that, you can't be super in touch with some parts of yourself. And then he just, when you ask these people about how they feel about their animals, they just, all the walls come down.
So did that vulnerable moment with him, did that make it on the air?
It didn't, unfortunately. I wish it could have. I had another amazing moment with a female musher. She was just by herself. She, her hair had gotten really tangled, and I was helping her untangle her hair, and I was kind of turning my mic on, so how was your day going? And she just broke down crying, telling me about how much she loved what she was doing, how she didn't want to do anything else other than run around with her dogs.
Florence Williams.
All right, so I'm going to read a paragraph from my introduction, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory, and it really explains what I'm doing in this book. So if I was going to do more than merely survive in my new urban habitat, the type now shared by most people on Earth, I was going to have to figure some things out. What was it about nature that people seemed to need? How could we get enough of it in our lives in order to be our best selves? And in the course of trying to answer these questions, I came to consider the human-nature connection on a neural level. Some weeks after we rolled into Washington, D.C., that's my new town, I left on assignment for Japan to write about an obscure and somewhat embarrassing Japanese practice called forest bathing. There, I learned the science behind what I was experiencing at home. And the Japanese researchers weren't content to leave nature to the realm of haikus. They wanted to measure its effects, document it, chart it, and deliver the evidence to policymakers and to the medical community. What the Japanese didn't really know, though, was why nature seemed to be helpful in alleviating so many things that ail us. And there were a lot of other things they didn't know. Who was best helped? By what mechanisms in the brain and body? What was the right dose? And moreover, what qualified as nature? I personally like Oscar Wilde's broad definition, a place where birds fly around uncooked.
Now, in that intro you're describing, you moved from Boulder to D.C., husband's job?
Right.
What was it? Okay.
Yep.
And, I mean, kind of a bummer, right?
It was a bummer.
You're leaving Boulder.
Yes. Had to leave
Tough,
Boulder,
right?
Move to the
What were those conversations
city.
like with your husband? Was it were you fighting for Boulder?
Oh yeah, my kids and I, we really tried to reverse course and stay put in Boulder, but we lost that fight.
Man, your husband is a convincing fellow. Must have been a good job.
He was a hard ass, and now we're getting divorced, so there you go.
The description of her leaving Boulder, you have that in the intro, right? Of you leaving Boulder.
Yeah.
It was like,
and I say
exactly how I would have described
right.
how upset I would have been.
Yeah, and moving to Washington, it's like you're going to sort of like the total den of iniquity. I mean, it's like such an evil place to land, especially now.
Yeah, particularly the time you went there.
Exactly.
What a challenging time to be going to D.C.
Oh, wow.
Well, and Michael.
This is the first time I saw a wildfire, which was in Connecticut, not where we see these huge fires out west. And it was an unusual experience. So I didn't intend to go to prison, certainly not to get overrun at a fire. In 1986, I had just taken a job as a newspaper photographer in Connecticut when I heard about a grass fire over the police scanner. It was the first wildfire I had ever responded to, either as a journalist or a firefighter. It wouldn't be anything like the flaming mountains of the West I'd seen photos of, or the fires I'd seen ranchers and farmers set on the Kansas plains, but I was nonetheless eager to get in on the action. I drove to a road from which I could see the smoke plume, then climbed over 2 barbed wire fences with my camera swinging off my shoulders. When I could see flames in the grass and men digging a line around it, I jogged close enough to start making pictures of them. I'd hardly had a chance to snap a frame before I heard yelling. When I looked, I saw that the shouting wasn't coming from the group surrounding the fire, but from a man in a uniform who was marching across the field toward me. As he came closer, I could see a badge. "What the hell are you doing in here?" he screamed. "You've got to leave, now." He was a guard at the nearby minimum security prison, built like a truck. The fire was burning on the grounds of one of Connecticut's correctional institutions. The firefighters were inmates. The press was rarely welcome there and never without an appointment. I stuttered an explanation but didn't manage to get a whole sentence out. He came at me like a football player, grabbing me by the armpits and dragging me away as if I were a toddler. I realized he was handling me the way he was trained to restrain the inmates. "This is a fucking prison," he shouted. "You can't walk in, and they can't just walk out." As his anger exploded at me, the blaze behind him blew up. A ball of flame started rolling across the waist-high grass toward one of the firefighters. It engulfed wooden fence post and reared above him. He ran toward me to escape it. I raised my camera and tried to get a shot off past the guard's legs, but my rough-and-tumble removal made framing and focusing impossible. The guard noticed my telephoto lens banging against his legs and looked down to see me trying to take a photograph. Then, looking over his shoulder, he saw the prisoner in the flames. I expected him to grab my cameras or at least block my lens with his hand, but he lifted me to my feet, pushed me to face the man running for his life. The guard stepped back as I pressed my finger down on the motor drive. The camera captured a sequence of black and white photos of the prisoner running, still carrying his shovel with the fire exploding behind him. The blaze rolled faster than the inmate could run, growing larger and faster as it devoured more of the thick, high grass. Just as it seemed it would swallow him, the wind subsided and the flames fell and retreated, like a wave crashing on a beach and then falling back into the ocean. Once the prisoner had escaped the flames, the guard grabbed me again, resumed his curses, and pushed me back to the fence where I had come in. I never got a chance to thank him for manhandling me into the position from which I took the photos. I never learned his name or the inmate's name, but I did learn that inmates fight wildfires, and most of them are fighting blazes outside prison fences. When I dug deeper into the use of inmates to fight wildfires, I learned that the California state prison system established road camps in 1915 to put low-risk inmates at work. When World War II drew away most of the state's forestry workers, inmate firefighters battled blazes from 41 temporary camps. A century later, nearly 4,000 minimum security inmates, men, women, and juveniles, were serving on 200 fire crews in California. With the number of California wildfires increasing, as many as 37% of the inmate firefighters working in California in 2015 had been violent offenders, according to California corrections officials. Most Western states have similar programs, putting prisoners in fire crews instead of chain gangs. Maybe, I thought when I learned of the programs, if they're so desperate for firefighters they're putting prisoners on the fire line, there might be an opportunity for me.
Wow, I didn't know that.
There was a really great recent New York Times magazine story about female inmate firefighters in California, and their statistic from a corrections official who runs these fire camps said that on any given California wildfire, between half and 2/3 of the firefighters are inmates now.
Do you know anything about the science to the runner's high? Is that a thing?
Yeah, well, that's a chemical. That's
yes.
a chemical thing. Yeah.
Zoe is fully addicted.
Yeah.
Zoe, are you fully addicted? You got the runner's high.
Full on addicted. Basically, you stress your body out enough that it starts to produce the closest thing that the brain can naturally produce to opioids.
Did you know that?
So it's pretty potent, and
I always wondered.
Yeah, you have to stress your. It doesn't happen with every run, unfortunately, but you do just kind of have to get to the point where your body's like, this is not great. I'm gonna counteract this.
Jake, did you know? We gotta get Jake in here. Jake, guys, intern Jake, CU student. Jake, did you know this about the runner's high?
No, I knew that it existed, but I did not know that. That's actually very interesting.
And the best part,
a
lot of people say, I've never experienced the runner's high, and you just
they haven't worked hard enough.
You just said why. They just haven't
you have to
gotten
push
there.
harder. Yeah, you have to get. Well, it's because it happens after you get really uncomfortable. You have to make yourself really uncomfortable to the point where your body has like a really visceral reaction to what you're doing to yourself.
Is it just running?
I mean, that's typically. I'm pretty sure I've gotten there on a bike, or I think you can do it from like any
Florence,
cardio.
have you gotten there
really.
on a kayak? A kayak? Is there a kayak high?
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
Yeah?
there's an adrenaline surge. You make it through a rapid, and you're just like thrilled to be alive. And you go into this.
That would be me.
Right. No, you
my
are.
wife saved my life on a rafting trip. I fell right in. She just like. I can't believe. Like now, I don't know if she'd do it, but back then, boom, right back in the boat.
Yeah, I mean, there's just this joy of being alive. You feel alive, when you're facing what your body perceives as danger.
The rock climbing is more of a focus, a laser,
like a flow state.
Yeah,
it's more
exactly.
of a flow state.
Well, yeah, but and I'm just wondering, because there's a mix. You've got a fear aspect to climbing and some of these other sports and some things like that drive adrenaline. But so what about a skate skier that's on a totally safe course, but is just hammering at it for 18 hours, at their max? So
that would be similar
to the runner's high.
I have this experience. I was listening to your podcast one time when I was on a long run, the one about the history of the sports bra, and I was like out there running and thinking about how like the history of all these women doing all this research was like enabling me to do what I was doing right then, and I got very emotional and had to like stop and like take a breather just because of like what it was such great storytelling and like such a powerful narrative and running.
I so appreciate that because I think, people think, oh, bras is sort of a lightweight topic. But in fact, the sports bra completely changed the way women can participate in sports. It was this really fundamental turning point for feminism. I mean, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, I really loved that episode.
And I love that you were actually jogging.
I was running.
Were you in a sports bra?
Okay, I didn't read that one.
Yeah.
I'll have to read that one, and I'm excited to read your book on boobs. Florence, in all the research that you've done, what was the most interesting or change your perspective the most?
Well, so I did this really interesting story, and I'd like to talk about it just because it's actually in this month's issue of Outside Magazine, and it's about sex trafficking survivors who are going backpacking for 3 days. And so these are women who have faced, chronic trauma, really for their almost entire lives, right? So they've survived sexual trauma, they've faced substance abuse issues, they've gone through a year of rehabilitation, and when you face that much trauma, you survive it by really disassociating from your body. So you go numb, right? And that's how you survive. It's a survival mechanism. It works. But when it comes time to recover, you have to learn how to feel your body again because you have to take responsibility for it. You have to take care of yourself. And it was being outside in the mountains, backpacking, that enabled these women to start to put their minds and their bodies together again. And that was so powerful for me to witness. It's not a way I had thought about wilderness as being healing. I just, I didn't know a lot about long-term trauma and that disassociation piece, and it was really cool.
That's amazing. It gave them the ability to connect with something again.
Exactly. And I think, we tend to think of wilderness therapy as being effective because it takes us out of our comfort zones, makes us challenge ourselves. It's that kind of like climb a peak and face hardship and be a better person. But with women like this, it was totally different. It turns that on its head. These women have been out of their comfort zones their whole lives. And what they need from nature is to find a place of comfort.
Big City Mountaineers is here in Golden.
Right.
They're a partner of ours for the Rare Talks that we're launching in May. They're actually going to be our nonprofit partner from the May 17th Rare Air Talks. And their whole thing is getting kids that don't have the access to the outdoors.
I love that group.
That are city bound.
Yep.
Out.
Well, it's an interesting idea. So many of us talk about, sufferfests and going to the mountains and going to the outdoors to find discomfort, to knock us out of the complacency that we have in our lives. And you're talking about going out there to find comfort because it's actually the indoor world where you actually were suffering.
That's right.
Well, all these people that we talk to, typically within their suffering, there's moments where they're finding that comfort.
Yes.
Right? And everyone talks about that.
Can we talk about noise?
Sure.
That was one thing that we both wanted to talk to us about. There is so much noise in our world.
There's so much noise.
Oh my God. I have 2 young kids, 1 and 4. So I'm off the charts with noise.
Right. Okay, so noise, it turns out it's probably our most pervasive pollutant.
It is.
It is everywhere. It's so hard to get away from. There have been studies showing that it is incredibly difficult to find any spot in this country where you cannot hear human sound for 15 minutes. So even like the quietest places in this country, there's an airplane.
Hot stat. That is what a stat that was.
Yeah, it's shocking actually. And so now one of the new missions of the Park Service is to actually protect the natural soundscape because it's a resource that we are losing and people aren't really talking about.
So it's kind of like the Dark Skies Initiative,
It's
where
like-
we're trying
it's
to create
related to
wilderness
dark
and
skies.
park areas that, where we don't have light contamination and you can actually see a purely dark sky, that, creating a quiet skies or a quiet wilderness area where we're not hearing, human activity of one kind or another.
You guys are all outdoor wilderness lovers. When you heard quiet, peaceful place, like where did you picture? Where did your mind go?
It made me think of my run across the Grand Canyon a couple weeks ago because the North Rim is closed right now. I went out just in the middle of the week. I just ran it by myself. I just wanted to be alone, and there weren't a lot of people out in the canyon at like 5 a.m. And I got to the other rim mid-morning. I hadn't seen a human for over 20 miles. I just sat on the North Rim of like the Grand Canyon by myself. And, you can see the trail, but that's all that there is. And there's no one there. And there's just like the sound of cactus. There's not even a lot of birds. There's just like really small plant sounds and all these amazing things. And there's just, it was the most amazing feeling.
Wait, seriously, you could hear the sound of cactus?
Yeah, like the wind on the
that.
cactus.
Okay.
It was because the wind was funneled
Cactus
up in the
blowing in
canyon.
the wind.
Yeah, cactus, but like they weren't moving. It was the sound of like the air
Cacti.
on the cacti. Yeah,
That is a quiet soundscape.
yeah,
That's
it
really
was amazing because I hadn't even because I had been running and just kind of like really in my head, and then I got there and was resting and realized how actually quiet it was. And I got my phone out to make a recording of how quiet it was, and I realized that was like a really silly thing to do. As an audio nerd, I was like, I gotta capture the sound. There's there's no sound.
So
it's just like a flat line.
You probably remember we brought in a speaker into the Center for Environmental Journalism just a few weeks ago, David Haskell, and he was a Pulitzer finalist for a book called The Forest Unseen and has a new book called The Songs of Trees. And he just has, with his smartphone, made recordings of these forests where he spent a lot of time reporting his books. And The Forest Unseen is an amazing idea where he reports a year in 1 square meter of forest. He just keeps going back to the same exact spot. And it is amazing the things that you can hear going on in the forest when you get sense of that quiet. I mean, he's got, various insects that you couldn't imagine, but no, they're deep inside this tree and they're eating. And if you listen carefully and record it, you can actually hear them munching.
Is this a podcast?
No, he's just recording it for his reporting. You should have. He comes here to Boulder pretty regularly now. You should bring him in. He's amazing. But yeah, so he would just play. Oh, and I was in, and I write about this in the book, and this is what it sounds like, and what I wrote in the book. Here's what I recorded. And you would hear, things in plants and in insects that I never dreamed you'd be able to hear.
Does anyone know of anything that is called soundscapes that's really good? Any sort of recordings out there? Do you know of any?
There's a guy, gosh, what is his name? There's a guy who does specialize in natural soundscapes, and if you Google natural soundscapes and TED Talks, he'll come up. Okay. He's got an amazing TED Talk.
And there's a guy that works for the National Park Service too, that records unusual audio in the parks, and basically goes to remote areas in parks where he's heard about a really cool sound and goes with really high-end audio equipment to record all kinds of different sounds.
So
wait, they gotta answer like when they heard Zen Full Place, right?
Sure.
Where did they think? Oh, you didn't like that.
No, I did.
What
like
did you
that.
think of?
When I think of I thought of backpacking up in Glacier National Park just in a day when I sat down. But the other thing that I think of, and this is something that we just did a couple of weeks ago, Zoe really helped put it together. We've started an annual hut trip for our center, backcountry skiing hut trip. And
I want you to invite me on that, by the way.
It's totally open to former fellows, so we'll make sure to invite you.
What about future fellows? Future fellows?
Future fellows too, sure. We've already actually had a future fellow, but it's the realization that if you get back into the right area, and rather than thinking in terms of what's the place where I'm going to hear something, it's what can I hear where I am right now? I'm in this amazing place. There's nobody else around, and why don't I just stop and lay down in the snow for a little bit and see what I hear? Because we have lots of amazing places really close to where we're at. I mean, close by at least big adventure standards. That you don't have to go that far to hear a fabulous soundscape.
Florence has shrimp waiting for her at the restaurant. Tell me about your Zen place.
Well, for the book, I wore this portable EEG cap, which was measuring my brain waves. And I was trying to get alpha waves, and I couldn't get them. I couldn't get them in city parks. I couldn't get them when I could hear natural sound, when I could hear human-made sounds, because it was pissing me off. And you can't generate alpha waves if you're pissed off. So I finally paddled on this lake in Maine, in rural Maine, and it was so quiet. It was like 6 a.m. There's mist rising from the lake. The bird songs were going crazy, and I got my alpha waves. I was really psyched.
She could hear.
Awesome.
She could hear
That's
the drops of
amazing.
water coming off of.
Oh
the
my
pallet.
God! You really read the book. Thank you. Yes.
She doesn't.
Yeah, well, what's
He's
clear
been
is that you haven't
talking
read
about
Thing where
mine.
you just don't believe people.
He's been talking about you for 2.5 years. I mean, I'm sure he could quote you all night long. You're finishing this program. What's the biggest nugget that you're taking with you?
Just, I think, storytelling. I think I came into a science writing program really excited about science and facts and data and like doing the reporting. But I think what I'm leaving with is the idea that it's about people at the end of the day and voices and how to actually tell a story that connects with human beings and less charts.
We have another special guest in the trailer. Dispatch Radio listeners may be familiar with Nick Mott, Uber producer here out of Boulder. We should mention everybody in the trailer is attached to that program, either currently or an alumnus. And you also may recognize Scott Carney as a name. We've had him on the show. A couple other fellows.
Oh, yeah. Well, Scott Carney, as you mentioned, wrote What Doesn't Kill Us. Dave Phillips was a fellow maybe 6 or 7 years ago. He left the CEJ and then just decided to go out and win a Pulitzer Prize, and now he covers Veterans Affairs for the New York Times. But his book just came out that he started during his fellowship. It is about wild horses in the West. It's called Wild Horse Country and gets into all of the science and social issues behind the conflicts around the Mustang in the West.
That is a rich topic.
It is a very rich topic. We've had some incredible audio journalists come through. Right now, Sadie Babbitts, who was the news director of Colorado Public Radio. Last year, Amy Martin was a fellow. She started the Threshold podcast that some of your listeners might be familiar with.
Good segue, Michael. Nick Mott, you're familiar with this Threshold podcast.
I'm very familiar with Threshold. I'm assistant producer over there, and I'm also a master's student at CU, and I have about 2 weeks left, and so it's Michael Kodas here that's making my life hell right now.
That's my role, and I only have 2 more weeks to do that to you and Zoe, so I've got all kinds of tricks up my sleeve for you guys.
So I gotta ask, is either of them late on assignment right now?
Define late.
I think that's answer enough. Oh, it's gotten uncomfortable.
No.
I think we've turned Nick red.
They're not.
I just turned in something actually fully on time, I think. Pretty on time.
Pretty on time. That's what we that's what we deal with.
Seems like Zoe's in the clear though.
No.
Oh!
I'm defending my semester-long professional project tomorrow for Mr. Kodas here.
Wow!
So
And you came out to record with us, Zoe. You are awesome.
It was his idea.
We love that.
I recruited her, which is just part of the punishment because
Yeah.
I just received it. I have to read the entire thing and listen to the entire thing before she defends tomorrow.
Isn't that
so that's what I'll be doing after I'm here
So
tonight.
You're procrastinating.
he
is what you're doing
he gets a
tonight.
preview here though.
The program just celebrated its 25th anniversary. The actual center celebrated its 25th anniversary in August, and we celebrated the graduation of our 100th Ted Scripps Fellow last year. Our 105th fellow will graduate in about a week. We kind of have 3 branches, which is we have the director and myself and some other faculty who are associated with us, who produce journalism. I write my books and do my magazine stories. Tom Yulesman, the director, has a blog of imagery of Earth for Discover Magazine. And then we have a graduate program in environmental journalism for master's students like Nick and Zoe. So we have a lot of students who come to study science writing, reporting on the environment and science to go into the field. And then kind of the crown jewel of the journalism program at the University of Colorado is the Ted Scripps Fellowship in Environmental Journalism, which is what Florence was. And that's a program for mid-career journalists. You come for 9 months with us. It's not a degree program, but we basically give you the keys to the university. You can study what you want with whoever you want. We arrange field trips. We go to all the federal research labs in the area. And that's where people like Scott Carney start their projects looking at hacking your body and hacking your mind.
So that is where, if you want to know some really cool journalism that's going to come out in a couple years, go talking to those students. Right?
Yeah,
Zoe?
I mean, I've loved having a front row seat to these people's incredible projects. It's how I met Amy and got involved with Threshold Podcast and fell in love with audio journalism. So like having access to people that are really kind of ahead of what other people are working on and are just able to dedicate a lot of time and mental energy to a project they care about is amazing.
We gotta let these guys go to dinner.
You do all my podcasts.
Thank you guys so much for coming out to Studio Boulder in the Airstream and talking to us. We hope you come back. Zoe, you're close. You're in town. We're gonna have Michael. You're close.
I'm close.
And Florence, you're here regularly.
I'm
You're
here
on the
regularly.
reg.
Invite me back.
Yeah. All right, guys.
You guys are so much fun. Thanks so much for coming.
Thanks for having us. This was
you.
great.
You guys are great. Thanks.